Not an ideal start to the preseason for the Blackhawks. I'll break down all the key takeaways from last night's loss to the Red Wings, as well as the first round of training camp roster cuts.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yo, what's going on, Blackhawks fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm Jack Bushman. You can go and check me out on X at Jack Bushman 2, but make sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey so you can get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Quick reminder to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube, and if you're tuning in through an audio platform and enjoy what you're listening to on a daily basis, I'm going to ask you to please go and rate and review the show either on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It's 100% free. Will not cost you anything and really does help me out in a major way in growing my platform. But happy Wednesday, Blackhawks fans. Wish there was a better vibe here to kick off today's show, but that definitely wasn't how we wanted to get the preseason started, right? 3-2 loss for the Blackhawks last night to the Red Wings up in Detroit. And it probably shouldn't have been that close. I mean, Hawks got outshot 43-17 in this game, including 31-9 over the final 40 minutes. I thought they came out and put together a pretty good first period. In particular, the opening 10 to 15 minutes. They were showing off their wheels, stringing together some good consecutive shifts, and altogether, I thought they looked dangerous in the first half of that opening period. But unfortunately, that just didn't last very long. And, considering that Connor Bedard, Frank Nazar, Sam Renzel, Artem Levshinov, Oliver Moore, Lucas Reichel. I mean, there were 8 former first-round picks in the lineup for the Blackhawks last night, and I know most of them have little to no NHL experience at this point and don't have a lot of experience alongside each other, but they were definitely the more talented and the better of the two lineups last night. I think Chicago native JT Compher and Jonathan Berggren might have been the only two true NHLers for Detroit in this game. It was basically the Grand Rapids Griffins on the ice yesterday. So considering that, it was definitely a disappointing and underwhelming start to the Jeff Blashill era in the Blackhawks preseason opener. However, it was only one preseason game, Blackhawks fans. That should not be lost on any of us. We need to take all of these things with a grain of salt, and I truly do believe that there were a lot of factors that played into why the Blackhawks performed so poorly last night. And I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just giving two sides of the argument, and I really do believe both of them are true. I believe there were a lot of reasons why the Blackhawks did not perform well at all last night, and I also do think they definitely should have performed better, and it was an underwhelming start to the preseason. I think both things can be true, and that's just kind of how things go in the preseason. You need to take it all with a little bit of a grain of salt. But first and foremost, not only was this the first preseason game of the season, it's also, of course, the first game-like action for all of these kids in 4, 5, 6 months. And another thing, the forward line combinations that Blashill rolled with last night, I don't think any of them got time in practice to develop chemistry with one another. It was kind of just a hodgepodge combination of young players that Blashill threw out there for his 4 forward lines. And they were all, outside of Dominic Toninato, Joey Anderson, and Sam Lafferty, I think they were all 23 years old or younger. So again, not a lot of pro level experience for that group, not a lot of experience alongside one another. And I think another thing that played a huge impact in terms of why the Blackhawks faded so hard in the second half of the game, it's because they haven't had a day off of training camp since things started last Thursday. And how has training camp been going, Blackhawks fans? Oh, right. Jeff Blashill has been absolutely working the tails off of these guys. A lot of conditioning drills, a lot of high-paced activities going on throughout practice. There have been a bunch of posts shown on social media of the guys huffing and puffing on their elbows and knees on the ice following some of these training camp sessions. It's been a lot of conditioning early on. And again, they haven't had a day off of rest until here today. And Blashill actually even kind of spoke about that prior to this game after the Blackhawks wrapped up their morning skate. He kind of expected them to fatigue in the second half of this game. And just considering altogether how hard he's had them working throughout training camp, I don't think it was too surprising, even though it was frustrating and unfortunate to see them just like hemmed into their own zone for those final two periods. It probably, maybe the extent of it surprised Jeff Blashill a little bit, but he did expect these guys to be a little bit fatigued, and not only their first full 60-minute game in several months, but also considering just how hard they've been working over the last week. Also, Monday, the day prior to this preseason opener, was the first time the Blackhawks actually scrimmaged during training camp. So while everything was fast-paced and moving quickly, and Blashill is doing everything with a purpose out there, it still wasn't game-like style reps. And even then, the Blackhawks only had one of those in their opening 6 days of training camp. And in addition to that, they only worked on special teams that same day one single time before this preseason opener. So again, a lot of things are still fresh, including Jeff Blashill's new systems, his new tendencies that he's implementing. And that's going to take time for these young players. He's even alluded to it's going to take time for the players to fully register these concepts and to fully grasp what Blashill wants the guys to be doing, and for that to become second nature for them out there on the ice. And honestly, Blackhawks fans, that's probably going to be an issue with this team when the regular season opens up. And I don't think that should be too surprising, just because it's such a young group. There's a lot of first or second year professional players on this team, and they're learning a lot of new things for the first time. And it's even going to be a little bit of a learning curve for some of the veteran guys on the roster, right? So in the first preseason game, I think it's understandable to see why some of these things played a factor, even if, again, it was a disappointing outcome and performance last night from the Blackhawks. Considering the talent they had on their lineup, on paper, they should have performed better against an AHL group like the Detroit Red Wings put out there last night. At the same point in time, I do think, considering it was only one preseason game and considering what's been going on throughout the opening week of training camp, a new head coach coming in, a very young group that's not too familiar with each other, I think we got to kind of just let this one go by us. That's the way the preseason works. Don't take anything too seriously. Just relax a little bit here, Blackhawks fans. And listen, I definitely feel you. I wanted to see better out of this young group last night, but the reality is it's only one preseason game that's not going to hold weight whatsoever on this group in, 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road here. So everyone should probably just relax, even though wasn't a very good start to the preseason last night. There are my first thoughts on the Blackhawks. 3-2 defeat to the hands of the Red Wings up at Little Caesars Arena. Coming up in just a moment here, Blackhawks fans, I'll go through some of the best and worst performances last night for the Blackhawks. But first, I do got to talk to you all real quick about one of today's sponsors, which is FanDuel. The NFL season is now here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. And what I personally love about FanDuel is that it's super quick, it's easy, and the best way to add a little more energy to your Sundays. And with player props, same-game parlays, and more ways than ever to get in on the action, are you ready to play? All you got to do is download the FanDuel app now or visit FanDuel.com today in order to get started. Again, that's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet and get $300 worth of bonus bets when it wins. Segment 2, there were lots of notable young players in the lineup, as I've already mentioned here on today's episode. For the Blackhawks last night in Detroit, definitely wanted to go through which ones made the most of their opportunity and those who didn't. Only a couple of real standouts, I think, considering the way that things transpired in the second and third period for the Blackhawks, but there were a couple who I thought really stood out, none more so than Connor Bedard. He was the best player on the ice for Chicago. Definitely what you wanted to see from him as he's getting ready for his third full NHL season. And honestly, I don't really think his line mates did him any favors. Colton Dach, Lucas Reichel, Bedard was throwing some dimes to set them up for some quality looks in the opening, like 10, 15 minutes of the game. I mean, Bedard's first 4 or 5 shifts, he was making something happen every time he touched the puck. And again, that's what you want to see from this kid at this time of year. He definitely looks faster. He also, I think, looks bigger. And I shared a couple of pictures on social media this summer of just how jacked Bedard was looking in a short sleeve t-shirt. We've obviously seen what his legs have looked like ever since he's gotten drafted, but I definitely think he got a little bit bulkier. I believe he added 10 pounds over the course of the summer. And again, I think most notably, he looked faster. And I've talked a few times on the show since last season ended about how that's really the biggest improvement that Connor Bedard needs to make. I think he's good on his edges. I think he's a quality skater, but his top speed has just been a little bit lacking thus far in his young career. Definitely looks like he's made a nice uptick in his top speed, and definitely looks like that off-season training that he's been putting in seems to be paying off at this point in time. Of course, he also scored the Blackhawks' opening goal of this preseason game, absolutely rifled a one-timer home on the power play from the left dot. Hopefully we'll be seeing a lot of that from 98 here this season. I think the second best Blackhawk in this game, and maybe even arguably their best, was Arvid Soderblom. He was the only reason why this game remained close in the second and third periods. And altogether, he wound up stopping 40 of the 43 shots that he faced in order to give his team a chance. I thought he looked really sharp from post to post. I thought he was pushing off really well, made some excellent reactionary saves too. Wish he didn't have to face as much rubber as he did last night, but it's definitely nothing new for Arvid Soderblom. He's been used to facing that type of action since he's been on the NHL scene for the last couple of years. Off to a really good start as he's set up to be Spencer Knight's backup to open up the regular season. I would say probably the third best member of the Blackhawks last night was Sam Rinzel. I think he was pretty clearly the Blackhawks' top defender, even though that's really not saying too much. He got the primary assist on Connor Bedard's PPG that opened up the scoring. And I just think altogether, him being that quarterback on the top power play unit with his offensive abilities, his skating, his recognition out there. I think he already has some decent chemistry along with Connor Bedard, and not just in the offensive zone setup on the man advantage, but I think just with their speed and their puck handling prowess, they've already meshed pretty well through the neutral zone in terms of their zone entries when on the power play. I thought I saw some good things from both of those guys when lugging the mail into the offensive zone last night. But Rinzel being that top pairing quarterback, I really think is going to give Bedard just a huge extra weapon to work with out there. And I know Seth Jones was a very capable offensive defenseman in that same position, but the lack of consistency from him on the man advantage, I think, was a real frustration and played a huge impact in why the Blackhawks were kind of hit or miss on their man advantage last year. When they were getting production from Seth Jones on the back end, the power play had a lot more upside, but when he really wasn't providing all that much, it was kind of just Connor Bedard left alone to go and do his own thing. Sam Rinzel, I think, provides a huge additional weapon out there on the ice with Bedard. And like Connor Bedard, Rinzel threw on a bunch of weight over the summer. I believe he added 17 pounds worth of muscle, which he credited to drinking a ton of protein shakes. He definitely looks bigger out there on the ice as well. And I definitely think that helped him in some of his board battles and grinding it out in the dirty areas. And he also, I don't think, sacrificed any speed out there while adding on that extra weight, which is definitely crucial because Sammy Rinzel has the ability to absolutely fly. And if he can keep that up around, 200 pounds, if he keeps trending in the right direction, he is going to be an absolute freight train out there on the ice for the opposition. Colton Dach was the last Blackhawk I wanted to mention here in terms of guys who I think made the most of their opportunity. I didn't think Dach had an outstanding game by any means. He took a bad penalty, didn't really make any noticeable plays in the neutral zone or in transition, but I thought he played his role to a T. He played how the Blackhawks want him to play. Physical, mixing it up in skirmishes, getting under the skin of the opposition, causing havoc, crashing the net. He did all of those things last night. And while it's still apparent to me that he doesn't really have a lot of puck skills, doesn't have great speed, it's hard for him to lug the puck through the neutral zone because guys are fairly easily able to strip the puck away from him. But I do think, again, with his size and his physicality and his net front presence, he can be a power forward that the Blackhawks really are missing in their forward group right now. So I do think, even though it was frustrating at times not see Doc bury some of the opportunities that Connor Bedard was generating, I do think altogether the style of play that he brought to the table last night altogether was encouraging. But then getting into some of the key strugglers for the Blackhawks last night, and there were definitely some of those. Lukas Reichel might have been the biggest disappointment in the Blackhawks lineup because he was given an opportunity along with Connor Bedard on that top line. He was the skill and the paced winger of the two, along with Bedard on that top line. And he just didn't really do anything with the opportunity. He had a good look in the opening 5 minutes of the game, but after that, I thought he was a ghost for the majority of the night, and Bedard was the driving factor for that line all throughout the game. It wasn't Lukas Reichel, so for him to have as absent of a performance as he did when Blashill has outlined this already as a make-or-break camp for Lukas was definitely disappointing, and gotta wonder if he's going to be given another opportunity along with Bedard or up on the Blackhawks top six. And out of all of these young players, Reichel was definitely the one that had the most NHL experience against an AHL group. He should have been absolutely thriving last night, even if it was the first preseason game. And he was very hard to notice, especially during those final two periods. Artem Levshinov also as well. I did not think had a good night whatsoever. I will say he kind of salvaged it with a very savvy coast-to-coast rush that also started with a nice play from him defensively in his own end. He shows off his skating ability, also shows off his play recognition. I thought it was really a good job by him to pull up in the offensive zone and then scan around and recognize who his open teammate was. Got it over to Aiden Thompson, who also I thought showed some good poise and patience to get that puck over to Wyatt Kaiser. He winds up tying the game 2-2. But outside of that for Artem Levshinov, outside of that sequence, that play, that secondary assist, I thought it was a pretty piss poor showing from Levshinov. And considering that he was paired up along with Wyatt Kaiser, and listen, I understand it's their first game together in several months, but of the Blackhawks defensive pairings last night, they definitely should have been the most fortified because they had a good stretch of NHL experience together last season. And in my opinion, they were the worst. I don't think Kaiser was as bad as Levshinov, but neither were good in the defensive zone. And just the concerns about Levshinov's positioning and some of his decision-making out there and being structured, there's still a ways to go for him in that department to be a full-time NHLer. And we saw some of those concerns at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase a couple of weekends ago. I do think he still had a pretty good performance altogether, and his skills and his size, he's just a lot better than a majority of the guys that were there in that rookie tournament. That was kind of at the forefront, but I think this was, I don't want to say a concerning first preseason game for Artem Levshinov, but I do think it was, like I talked about on the show when the Matt Grzelcyk PTO got signed. I just wonder if the Blackhawks, what they saw at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase and what they saw last night out of Levshinov, I just wonder if that tells them that this kid needs some more time down in the AHL to develop. And again, Kyle Davidson has had a thrive, not survive mentality with these prospects when they become full-time NHLers. And what I saw from Artem Levshinov last night, I just don't know if he's ready to thrive at the NHL level. So I know it was only one preseason game, but I don't think you can help but wonder how this impacts the plan for Levshinov and the Blackhawks blue line as a whole based on what they saw from him last night, because it might have been one of his worst games with the Blackhawks. Kevin Korchinski, another young defenseman for the Blackhawks last night. Wasn't horrible by any means, but I just didn't really notice KK at all. And I thought he made some muffin passes out there. One of them, he tried to go D to Louis Crevier in his own end and threw him like a waist-high pass. And I was like, dude, that just can't happen. And I know Kevin Korchinski is still 21 years old. The expectation is for him to begin in Rockford, and I don't think that'll be a bad thing for him whatsoever. But just considering the rise of and the depth that the Blackhawks have in this blue line, in addition to the sheer number of young players that have really started to step onto the scene these last 2 years and are establishing themselves, we got to start seeing that a little bit more out of Kevin Korchinski. And I do, want to give him another opportunity or two in the preseason, probably not along with Louis Crevier on the third pairing to truly see what he's got. But I just didn't really notice Korchinski whatsoever last night. It was almost kind of in a similar way to Lucas Reichel. He was a little bit of a ghost out there. And then Ethan Del Mastro, last but certainly not least. I saw Ben Pope from Chicago Sun-Times, who's one of my favorite, if not my actual number one favorite on the Blackhawks beat. He was kind of giving Del Mastro a little bit of a tough time on social media. I really didn't think Del Mastro had as poor of a performance as Ben did, but still wasn't great by any means. And considering that he was given a major opportunity along with Sam Rinzel, I don't really think that duo or Del Mastro was the anchor defensively or performed as well as the Blackhawks would hope he did in that style of role in their first game-like action with one another. So in addition to Levshinov and how that's going to impact the Blackhawks blue line, I do wonder if there's some consideration of Del Mastro being split up with Sam Rinzel as they've been skating together for a majority of training camp thus far. Maybe they go with, Ethan Del Mastro and Connor Murphy. Maybe switch up that Vlasic and Murphy pairing. I'm not exactly sure, but the young defenseman for the Blackhawks last night, outside of Sam Rinzel, I did not think looked all that sharp. But again, it was only one preseason game. Very curious, though, to see how that's going to impact things at practice during training camp the rest of the week before the Blackhawks are back in action for their second preseason contest on Saturday against the St. Louis Blues. But that takes care of everything that I have from last night's 3-2 loss to the Detroit Red Wings in the preseason opener. Coming up in just a moment. Before I wrap things up, still got to break down the first round of training camp roster cuts. Real quick, though, I do also got to talk to you all about another one of today's sponsors, which is Monarch Money. Most people can't name all of their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. But that's why there is Monarch Money, an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, super easy to use interface, both available on your phone and on your laptop. And Monarch does all of the heavy lifting for you so that you can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever having to touch a spreadsheet. So don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks any longer. Go and use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps at monarchmoney.com, and you'll also get half off on your first year. Again, that's 50% off on your first year at monarchmoney.com when you use our promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps. Real quick, just wanted to say thank you to everyone for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no offseason, bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. And you can now find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you may be listening to your podcasts. Segment 3, we heard rumblings of this coming from Darren Pang on the CHSN broadcast last night, but the Blackhawks officially made their first round of training camp roster cuts here this morning, and 4 players have been sent back to their respective junior clubs in the OHL and the WHL. First, Nathan Bem, he'll be heading back to the Kamloops Blazers in the WHL. Merrick Vanacker and Parker Holmes are going back to the OHL with the Brantford Bulldogs. And then Jack Pridham is heading back to Kitchener to join on with the Rangers. Pridham and Vanacker, by the way, were both down on the fourth line for the Blackhawks last night against the Red Wings. Dominic Toninato was the fourth line center in the middle. I thought it was pretty clear that both of those guys were a little bit in over their heads. I know I have a little bit of an affinity for Jack Pridham. That's well known, but unbiasedly, I really did think he probably had the more noticeable performance of the two. I just thought he was in the right spots a couple of times and had a really good look at the right dot, a little bit in the high slot. Unfortunately, tried to toe drag the shot instead of just a quick wrister getting let off on Sebastian Cossa in net for Detroit because he toe dragged it. That extra split second gave the Red Wings defender an opportunity to come and get his stick on the puck there. But I did think Pridham was in the right spots, made some nice plays with his stick defensively as well. But obviously both of them still need some development and still need to go through some things before making the full-time leap before the NHL. Both of them, though, should have monster years in the OHL, considering Pridham is one of the best players for the Kitchener Rangers. Marek Vanacker is going to be a huge driving point with the Brantford Bulldogs, along with Jake O'Brien. Both of them have realistic hopes of winning the OHL championship here this season. Nathan Bem, honestly, I was a little bit surprised that he didn't get into this preseason game last night, considering that he looked pretty sharp at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. I thought he's had some good showings throughout training camp here as well. I actually expected Nathan Bem to be in the Blackhawks lineup last night, as well as Nick Lardis. Those were probably the two players that surprised me the most that they didn't get in there last night for Chicago. But again, did want to give guys like Jack Pridham and Marek Vanacker some action before sending them back to their junior clubs. Parker Holmes, last but certainly not least, didn't really notice him, if I'm being honest, whatsoever throughout training camp and the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. But hey, maybe that shouldn't be all that surprising because there's no fighting going on in training camp. There were a couple fights at the Tom Curvers Prospect Showcase. A little surprised he didn't get into one of them, but that's what Parker Holmes is known for, is being a fist chucker. Had 1 assist in 21 games with the Brantford Bulldogs last year. Will never be known for his offense. We'll see what kind of role he winds up playing for Brantford alongside Marek Vanacker in the OHL this season. But there are the 4 players that were part of the first roster cuts for the Blackhawks here during training camp. That is going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks, everyone. As always, thank you all again for joining me on the show. Be sure to subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free as well. That way you don't miss out on any of the latest episodes. You can check me out on X at Jack Bushman too, but make sure to follow my Strictly Blackhawks account at Talkin' Hockey to get all of the latest Blackhawks news and updates. Until tomorrow's episode, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Wednesdays. I'll see you next time on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.